March 12, 1944, 3:17 p.m. A small village in occupied France. Jean-Claude Moreau stands at the edge of a forest clearing watching 23 German soldiers walk into his trap. They're laughing, rifles slung over shoulders, completely unaware. In 45 seconds, all of them will be dead. Jean-Claude will save his village from a planned reprisal massacre. He'll become a local hero. And then for the next 40 years, he'll wish he'd never pulled that trigger. But here's the detail that will make you question everything you know about resistance heroism. Jean-Claude didn't suffer from enemy retaliation or Nazi punishment. The Germans never caught him. He survived the war without a scratch. What destroyed his life came after liberation, from his own government, his own neighbors, his own mind. Because when the shooting stopped and investigators started asking questions, that 45-second ambush began to look less like heroic resistance and more like something else entirely. It was early 1944. The Allied invasion everyone knew was coming hadn't happened yet. France had been occupied for 4 years. In that time, two types of France had emerged: the visible one that collaborated or endured, and the invisible one that resisted. The resistance wasn't one organization, but dozens of cells, groups that barely knew each other existed. Communication was dangerous. Coordination was nearly impossible. Each cell operated independently, making their own decisions, living with their own consequences. Jean-Claude Moreau was 32 years old, a schoolteacher from a village of 400 people in the Vosges region near the German border. Before the war, he'd taught mathematics and history. He'd never fired a weapon in anger. He'd never killed anyone. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't a revolutionary. He was a man who'd watched his country fall and decided he couldn't just keep teaching fractions while Germans marched past his classroom window. His village sat on a minor road between two larger towns, strategically worthless, which had kept it relatively safe. The Germans came through occasionally, supply convoys, patrol units, nothing major. The villagers kept their heads down, followed orders, survived. It could have stayed that way until liberation. Then came the intelligence that changed everything. A resistance courier arrived with a warning. German command had identified Jean-Claude's village as a source of partisan activity. It wasn't true. The village had been quiet, careful, uninvolved. But someone had been caught with false papers listing Jean-Claude's village as their residence. Someone under interrogation had mentioned the village name. The details didn't matter. What mattered was the decision made at German headquarters. This village would serve as an example. The massacre was scheduled for March 13, 1944. A full company, approximately 120 men, would surround the village at dawn, execute every male over the age of 15, burn the buildings, and leave. The same playbook the Germans had used in dozens of French villages. Oradour-sur-Glane would follow 3 months later. 642 civilians murdered in a single day. But Jean-Claude's village would come first. The courier brought this information on March 11th. 2 days warning. Not enough time to evacuate 400 people without drawing attention. Not enough time to organize conventional resistance. Not enough time to do anything except watch everyone he knew die or attempt something desperate. Jean-Claude made a choice. If the Germans were coming to massacre his village based on false accusations of partisan activity, then he would give them real partisan activity. He would turn their justification into reality by hitting them first. Hitting them hard enough that the reprisal force would have to divert, delay, or cancel the planned massacre. He had 11 men in his resistance cell. Not soldiers, a farmer, a blacksmith, 2 teenagers, men who'd done courier work and intelligence gathering, but never combat. He had 48 hours to plan an ambush that would kill enough Germans to stop a massacre. The question you must be asking now is, how do you kill 23 enemy soldiers in 45 seconds with 11 untrained men and inadequate weapons? The answer involves a level of violence that would haunt Jean-Claude Moreau for 40 decades, destroy his marriage, turn his community against him, bring him to trial for war crimes, and teach him that sometimes the cost of heroism is everything you have left to lose. This is the story of what happens when you save everyone but yourself.
March 11th, 9 p.m. Jean-Claude Moreau spreads a hand-drawn map across the kitchen table in the farmhouse cellar. 11 men crowd around it, their faces illuminated by a single kerosene lamp. The map shows a stretch of forest road 3 kilometers outside the village, the route German patrols use twice weekly when traveling between Epinal and Saint-Dié. The intelligence is specific. A 23-man patrol will pass through this route at approximately 3 p.m. on March 12th, the day before the planned village massacre. It's a supply escort, lightly armed, routine. The Germans have been using this route for months without incident, which means they're complacent, predictable, vulnerable. Jean-Claude has taught mathematics for 12 years. Now he's applying those skills to killing. 11 shooters against 23 targets. If each shot kills instantly, they need just over 2 targets per shooter. But real combat isn't mathematics. Weapons jam, men miss, targets move. Panic spreads. They need overwhelming advantage in the initial seconds, concentrated fire that creates immediate catastrophic casualties before the Germans can organize response. The kill zone is a clearing where the forest road narrows between 2 steep embankments. The road cuts through a natural depression, almost like an amphitheater. The embankments rise 4 meters from each side, providing elevated firing positions with clear lines of sight down into the depression. The Germans will be exposed, channeled, trapped. Jean-Claude positions his men with geometric precision. 6 shooters on the north embankment, 5 on the south. The north side gets the Sten gun, British-made, fully automatic, 32-round magazine, 500 rounds per minute. That weapon will deliver the initial shock, the sudden, overwhelming violence that paralyzes decision-making. The rifles will provide accurate fire. Each rifleman is assigned a sector, a specific arc of responsibility. No 2 men aim at the same area. The shotguns, devastating at close range but limited in capacity, will target anyone who tries to escape uphill toward the shooter's positions. Weapons inventory. The Sten gun has 96 rounds total across 3 magazines. The rifles have between 20 and 40 rounds each. The shotguns have perhaps a dozen shells between them. The pistols are backup, close-range desperation weapons. They have enough ammunition for 1 engagement, maybe 2 if they're careful. There will be no sustained firefight. This has to be decisive, overwhelming, final. Timing is everything. The Germans will be marching in column formation on the narrow road. When they enter the kill zone, they'll be strung out over approximately 40 meters, roughly 2 meters between each soldier, standard spacing for road march. The entire column won't be visible simultaneously. The shooters will have to wait until maximum targets are exposed before opening fire. The signal will be a bird call, specifically a hoopoe, common in these forests, but distinct enough to recognize as artificial. Jean-Claude will give the signal from the north embankment. When the call sounds, every weapon fires simultaneously. No hesitation, no warning, no chance for surrender.
The first 3 seconds are critical. The Sten gun will sweep the center of the column where the officer and NCOs typically position themselves. Leadership dies first. The rifles will engage targets from front to rear, systematic, mechanical. The shotguns wait for anyone who breaks toward the embankments. 45 seconds. That's the window they've calculated.
45 seconds of concentrated fire before weapons run dry, before the need to reload creates vulnerability, before any surviving Germans can organize return fire. Jean-Claude assigns sectors by skill. Pierre, the farmer who hunts boar every autumn, gets a rifle and the southernmost position where fleeing Germans are most likely to run. Henri, who's never fired a weapon in his life, gets the Sten gun because automatic fire doesn't require precision, just the courage to hold the trigger. The two teenagers, both 17, get pistols and instructions to finish any wounded Germans who might be still dangerous. That last instruction is what haunts Jean-Claude even before the ambush happens. Finish the wounded. He's telling children to execute injured men. But wounded Germans with weapons are still Germans with weapons. In 45 seconds, there's no time for mercy, no time for hesitation, no time for anything except killing until the threat is eliminated. They discuss what happens after. Strip the bodies of weapons and ammunition. Take identity papers and documents, intelligence value. Scatter into the forest using pre-planned routes. Meet at the safe house in 4 days. Tell no one. The Germans will investigate, will conduct sweeps, will interrogate villagers. The story is, we were hunting, heard shooting, fled like everyone else. What they don't discuss is what it will feel like. What it sounds like when 23 men die in 45 seconds. What it smells like. What it does to you psychologically to kill humans at 3 meters. Jean-Claude knows this, has read enough history to understand that killing changes you in ways that don't reverse. At midnight, they leave separately. Jean-Claude stays behind, staring at the map. The geometry is perfect. The math is sound. Tomorrow, at 3:17 p.m., if everything works, 23 Germans will die and 400 villagers will live. It's the most moral calculation he's ever made. It's also murder, premeditated and deliberate. He wonders if he'll be able to live with it. He has no idea that the answer is no.
March 12, 1944, 2:45 p.m. Jean-Claude lies prone on the north embankment, the damp earth soaking through his coat. 11 men are invisible in the forest, 6 on his side, 5 across the clearing. They've been in position since noon, 3.5 hours of absolute stillness. No talking, minimal movement, waiting. The forest is quiet, except for wind through bare branches and occasional bird calls. Real ones, not signals. It's early spring, cold, the ground still half frozen from winter. Jean-Claude's hands are numb despite gloves. He flexes his fingers periodically, keeping them functional. When the moment comes, there will be no second chance because of cold fingers. 2:58 p.m. Henri, positioned 15 meters to Jean-Claude's left with the Sten gun, makes a barely perceptible movement. It's the signal. He's heard something. Jean-Claude strains to listen. There, voices. German voices. Casual conversation, laughter. The sound grows louder. They're coming. 3:03. The first German appears at the southern edge of the clearing, rifle slung over his shoulder, smoking a cigarette. He's young, maybe 20, talking to the man behind him. They're relaxed, comfortable. This is routine patrol, boring duty, nothing to worry about. They've walked this route dozens of times without incident. More Germans emerge. The column stretches out as they enter the clearing. Jean-Claude counts silently. 5, 8, 12, 15. The spacing is uneven. Some men walk close together in conversation, others lag behind. Not textbook formation, which makes sense. This isn't combat patrol. This is escort duty in what the Germans consider pacified territory. 20, 21, 22, 23. The entire patrol is in the kill zone now, strung out across 40 meters of open ground. The officer,
identified by slightly better uniform and pistol holster, is near the middle of the column, exactly where doctrine says he should be. He's consulting a map, pointing at something, giving instructions to the sergeant beside him. Jean-Claude watches them through the underbrush. Real men, not training targets. They have names, families, lives that extend beyond this forest clearing. In perhaps 30 seconds, all of them will be dead because Jean-Claude is about to make a bird call. His mind catalogs details with strange clarity. The cigarette smoker at the front laughs at something, breath misting in cold air. 2 soldiers near the rear share food from a tin. The officer folds his map, returns it to a pocket. Ordinary moments. Last moments. Jean-Claude's hand moves to his mouth. He makes the hoopoe call, a distinctive hoop, hoop, hoop that carries clearly through still air. 20:17 p.m. 11 weapons fire simultaneously. The sound is overwhelming, a thunderclap of overlapping gunfire that echoes off the embankments and rolls through the forest. The Sten gun opens first, a stuttering roar that tears through the center of the German column. Henri is holding the trigger, emptying the magazine in one continuous burst because that's what Jean-Claude told him to do. 32 rounds in approximately 4 seconds. The officer goes down immediately, along with 5 men near him. Not gracefully, not dramatically, they simply collapse as bullets punch through flesh and bone. The sergeant beside the officer spins, mouth open in shock or pain, and falls. The riflemen fire more deliberately. Each shot is aimed, targeted. Pierre hits the smoker at the front. The man jerks backward, cigarette flying from his mouth and crumples. Another German reaches for his rifle, trying to unsling it, and takes a bullet through the chest before his hands complete the motion. Chaos erupts in the clearing. Germans who weren't hit in the first volley scatter in every direction. Some run forward, some backward, some throw themselves flat. Several try to return fire blindly, shooting at muzzle flashes they can barely locate. One German screams for the officer who's already dead. The ambush is working exactly as planned and nothing like Jean-Claude imagined. The mathematics are perfect. Concentrated fire, maximum casualties, overwhelming shock. But the reality is chaos. Men are screaming. Blood sprays across snow-dusted ground. Bodies are everywhere, some still moving, some trying to crawl, some completely still. Jean-Claude fires his rifle 4 times. Each shot hits a target. He doesn't know if any of them die from his bullets specifically. There's too much fire, too much confusion to track individual kills. He just shoots at Germans who are still standing, still armed, still dangerous. Henri reloads the Sten, fumbling with the magazine. His hands shake violently. When the weapon fires again, the burst goes wild, bullets chewing into dirt and tree bark. He's lost control, just holding the trigger and spraying. It doesn't matter. There are so many targets that random fire still hits flesh. 22 seconds have elapsed. Roughly half of the Germans are down. The rest are trying to organize return fire or escape. 3 Germans rush toward the south embankment, where Pierre and 2 others are positioned. The shotguns roar. At 10 meters, buckshot is devastating. All 3 Germans collapse. A German soldier, wounded in the leg, crawls toward his rifle 3 meters away. One of the 17-year-olds, Mark, scrambles down from the north embankment and shoots him twice with a pistol at point-blank range. The boy's face is white with shock, eyes wide, but he pulls the trigger because that's what he was told to do. Finish the wounded. 35 seconds. The firing is sporadic now. Individual shots as riflemen engage the last standing Germans. 4 Germans at the rear of the column have taken cover behind a fallen log and are shooting back. Their fire is accurate enough to force the ambushers to keep their heads down. Pierre takes a round through his coat sleeve. It doesn't hit flesh, but it's close. Jean-Claude targets one of the Germans behind the log. The man is reloading his rifle, visible for just a moment. Jean-Claude fires. The German's head snaps back and disappears behind the log. Whether he's dead or just taking cover, Jean-Claude doesn't know. 42 seconds. The last German standing. The wounded soldier from the leg injury that Mark thought he'd killed but apparently only wounded staggers upright with a pistol. He's disoriented, bleeding heavily, probably in shock. He fires twice, wildly, hits nothing, and 3 rifles shoot him simultaneously. He falls and doesn't move again. 45 seconds. Silence descends like a physical weight. The gunfire stops. Nobody is shooting back. Nobody is moving except the dying. Jean-Claude stands slowly, ears ringing from gunfire. Smoke drifts through the clearing. Powder smoke from rifles, thicker smoke from the Sten gun. The odor is overwhelming. Cordite, blood, voided bowels. 23 bodies lie scattered across 40 meters of forest road. Some died instantly, others are still dying. He walks down the embankment. His men emerge from their positions, moving like sleepwalkers. Nobody speaks. What is there to say? They've just killed 23 men in less than a minute. The plan worked perfectly. The mathematics were sound, the execution was flawless. Jean-Claude approaches the German officer. The man is dead, multiple wounds to the chest and abdomen. His map has fallen from his pocket into a puddle of blood. Jean-Claude picks it up, wipes it clean, pockets it. Intelligence value. Henri is vomiting behind a tree, the Sten gun lying at his feet. One of the teenagers is crying silently, tears streaming down his face. Pierre walks among the bodies mechanically, collecting weapons and ammunition. Somebody has to do it. Better to focus on tasks than think about what they've done. A wounded German groans, trying to crawl. Mark raises his pistol, but Jean-Claude stops him. No more. The boy looks confused. But you said. I know what I said. No more. Jean-Claude kneels beside the wounded man. He's young, maybe 19, shot through the stomach. He's dying, will be dead in minutes or hours, but he's dying slowly. Jean-Claude knows he should finish it, knows it's mercy, but he can't. He's killed enough today. They strip the bodies of papers, weapons, and ammunition. The whole process takes 12 minutes. Then they scatter into the forest using planned routes. Behind them, 23 Germans lie dead in a clearing that will be discovered by their comrades in approximately 3 hours. Jean-Claude runs through the forest, branches whipping his face, lungs burning. He's running from the clearing, from the bodies, from what he's done. But there's no distance far enough. The images are already burned into memory. The officer's surprise, the smoker's cigarette tumbling through air, the boy crying as he pulled the trigger, the wounded man crawling through his own blood. 45 seconds. That's all it took to kill 23 men and save 400 villagers. Also, all it took to destroy Jean-Claude Moreau, though he doesn't understand that yet. If this story is making you think differently about heroism, hit that like button and subscribe. There's much more to Jean-Claude's story ahead.
March 13th, 1944, 6 a.m. The planned massacre time comes and goes. No German company surrounds the village. No executions occur. The 400 people of Jean-Claude's village awake to another day of occupation, unaware that they should be dead. The German response to the ambush is swift and predictable. The bodies are discovered by a follow-up patrol at approximately 6 p.m. on March 12th, 3 hours after the attack. By nightfall, reinforcements flood the area. SS units conduct sweeps through the forest, interrogate villagers and surrounding communities, establish checkpoints on every road. But the reprisal massacre scheduled for Jean-Claude's village is cancelled. The Germans redirect their entire focus to hunting the ambushers. The logic is strategic. Punishing a passive village sends a message, but hunting active resistors addresses an immediate threat.
The 120 men designated for the March 13th massacre are instead deployed to search operations. Jean-Claude and his men remain hidden in scattered safe houses across the region. They monitor German activity through sympathetic villagers who report troop movements. For 3 weeks, the Germans conduct intensive operations, raids, searches, interrogations. They arrest 17 people on suspicion of involvement. All are later released when no evidence connects them to the ambush. The actual attackers remain unidentified. April 3, 1944. The German sweep operations wind down. The SS units withdraw. Life in the region returns to occupation normal. Jean-Claude and his cell emerge from hiding and return to their village. The welcome is complicated. The village knows by now about the ambush. News spreads through occupied France through whispered conversations and resistance networks. They know that 23 Germans died in a forest clearing, and they know the reprisal massacre didn't happen. Basic mathematics suggests connection. The ambush prevented the massacre. Jean-Claude saved them. When he walks through the village on April 4th, people stop him constantly. Handshakes, embraces, tears of gratitude. You saved us. My children are alive because of you. We owe you everything. The mayor holds a private meeting in his home with Jean-Claude and the other attackers, thanking them on behalf of the community. But Jean-Claude can't accept the gratitude. When people thank him, he nods and says nothing. When they embrace him, he stands rigid, uncomfortable. When they call him a hero, something inside him recoils. He sees their faces, the villagers, his neighbors, the children playing in streets who should be dead, and he sees the other faces, the smoker, the officer, the 19-year-old bleeding out in the forest. 23 Germans died so these people could live. The mathematics are clear. 23 enemies versus 400 innocents. The moral calculus couldn't be simpler. But Jean-Claude's mind doesn't work in moral calculus anymore. It works in images. The way blood sprays in cold air, the sound of bullets hitting flesh, the crawling wounded man he left to die slowly. His wife Marie notices the change immediately. Before the ambush, Jean-Claude was gentle, thoughtful, present. Now he's distant, hollow. He sits at their kitchen table staring at nothing for hours. He startles at loud noises. When she touches him unexpectedly, he flinches. At night, he doesn't sleep. She wakes to find him sitting by the window at 3 a.m., watching the street. "Talk to me," she pleads. "Tell me what happened." "We killed them, all of them. It took 45 seconds. You saved us." "I know." But his tone suggests knowing doesn't help. Saving 400 people should feel redemptive, transformative, meaningful. Instead, Jean-Claude feels nothing except the weight of 23 corpses. The rest of his cells struggles similarly. Henry stopped speaking almost entirely. He communicates in nods and gestures. Pierre has nightmares that wake his entire family. The 17-year-old who shot the wounded German at point-blank range has started drinking his father's wine before noon. They saved their village, and none of them can celebrate. 6 weeks after the ambush, the first investigation begins. Not German. They never identify the ambushers. French. The regional resistance coordinator arrives asking questions. Who authorized the operation? Was there command approval? What were the specific circumstances of each death? Jean-Claude explains. Intelligence indicated imminent massacre. Ambush prevented it. All targets were armed enemy soldiers. The coordinator takes notes, asks about the wounded Germans. Were any shot after they dropped weapons? They were all still dangerous, Jean-Claude says. That's not what I asked.
The coordinator leaves. His report goes to London, to Free French headquarters, to people making lists of wartime actions that might require post-war examination.
Jean-Claude doesn't know this yet, but he's just entered a database of questionable resistance activities. Meanwhile, doubt spreads in the village. Quiet conversations, whispered questions. Did the ambush prevent the massacre or cause it? The logic seems sound. Germans planned massacre. Resistance attacked them. Germans diverted to hunt attackers instead. But what if the intelligence was wrong? What if no massacre was actually planned? What if Jean-Claude saved 400 people, or maybe he committed mass murder based on bad information? The uncertainty is corrosive. Neighbors who thanked him in April avoid eye contact by July. The celebration gives way to uncomfortable silence. Jean-Claude becomes aware of conversations that stop when he enters rooms. Parents pull their children away when he walks past. The hero of April is the uncomfortable presence of July. August 1944. Paris is liberated. The German occupation collapses. Allied forces sweep across France. Jean-Claude's village is freed without a shot fired. The Germans simply withdraw, retreating towards Germany. The occupation ends. The village celebrates liberation with the rest of France. Flags appear. People dance in streets. Church bells ring for the first time in 4 years. Jean-Claude attends the celebration, stands at the edge of the crowd, watches people rejoice. He's glad they're alive, glad they're free. He just can't feel glad himself. Marie asks him, "Isn't this what you fought for?" "Yes," he says, "and it is. He fought so these people could be free, so children could play without fear, so France could be France again. The outcome is exactly what he wanted. But the cost is inside him. Images that won't stop, sounds that echo in quiet moments, the knowledge that he's capable of killing 23 men in 45 seconds and feeling nothing except the need to kill more. That knowledge doesn't disappear with liberation. It stays. A week after liberation, the new French provisional government announces investigations into wartime conduct. They'll examine collaboration, certainly, but also resistance actions, ensure everything was legitimate, prevent vigilante justice from masquerading as patriotism. Jean-Claude hears this announcement on a cracking radio and knows with absolute certainty that his 45 seconds in March are about to become a lifetime problem. He was right. September 1944. France is celebrating liberation while simultaneously grappling with the chaos of épuration, the purge. Across the country, approximately 9,000 summary executions occur as resistance members settle scores with collaborators. Women who slept with German soldiers have their heads shaved in public squares. Accused traitors are shot without trial in village streets. The new French provisional government, led by Charles de Gaulle, faces an impossible task: restore order while satisfying the population's thirst for justice. They establish courts to try collaboration cases, create commissions to investigate wartime conduct, attempt to distinguish between legitimate resistance and criminal violence disguised as patriotism. Jean-Claude receives his first summons on October 12, 1944. A government investigator wants to discuss the March 12th ambush. The meeting takes place in the village mayor's office, neutral ground officially. The investigator is a young man, maybe 30, wearing a new uniform of the French forces of the interior. He has a notebook, questions, and the kind of certainty that comes from not having killed anyone. "Tell me about the ambush," he says. Jean-Claude recounts the intelligence about the planned massacre, the decision to attack, the execution of the operation. He keeps his description factual, clinical. 11 men, 23 targets, 45 seconds of concentrated fire. The investigator takes notes, nods occasionally, shows no reaction. "All 23 Germans were killed?" "Yes." "Any wounded?" "Some were wounded initially, then died." "How long between being wounded and dying?" Jean-Claude hesitates. This is where the questions become dangerous. Minutes. Some longer. Were any of the wounded still armed when they died? I don't know. The situation was chaotic. But you were there. You must have seen. Jean-Claude sees where this is going. Under international law, specifically the Hague Conventions and the Geneva Conventions, combatants who surrender or are incapacitated and disarmed are treated as prisoners of war. Killing wounded, unarmed enemies is a war crime. The investigator is trying to determine whether the ambush was legitimate combat or murder. We were fighting for France, he says. Many people committed crimes while claiming to fight for France. That's why we're investigating. The meeting ends with no conclusions. The investigator says he'll need to interview the other participants, examine physical evidence from the ambush site, review the intelligence that prompted the action. Jean-Claude feels like a suspect rather than a hero. Over the following months, all 11 of Jean-Claude's cell are interviewed separately. The investigators ask detailed questions. Who shot which German? Were any killed while trying to surrender? What happened to the wounded? The questions assume that something improper occurred, that the ambush crossed from legitimate resistance to criminal violence. The physical evidence becomes problematic. In November 1944, a French military forensics team examines the ambush site. The bodies have long since been removed and buried by German forces, but the site itself reveals details. Shell casings from 11 positions indicate firing locations. Bloodstains and impact patterns show where Germans died. Most concerning, several blood pools show drag marks, suggesting wounded Germans were moved before being shot. The forensic report is clinical and damning. It estimates that 15 Germans died in the initial volley. 8 survived initially with wounds of varying severity. Of those 8, at least 4 were shot again at close range, within 1 to 2 meters based on powder residue and wound patterns. The report cannot determine if these close-range shots were mercy killings of dying men or executions of prisoners. Jean-Claude is called back for questioning in December 1944. The investigator presents the forensic findings. 4 Germans were shot at point-blank range after being wounded. Can you explain that? They were still armed, still dangerous. We had to neutralize the threat. The evidence suggests some were shot while incapacitated. One had crawled 6 meters from his weapon based on blood trail analysis. Jean-Claude remembers the wounded man crawling, Mark running down with the pistol, 2 shots at close range. At the time, it seemed necessary. The man was still alive, still potentially dangerous. But looking back through the lens of peacetime law, it looks like execution. We were fighting a war, Jean-Claude says. We didn't have time for nuance. War has rules, even resistance warfare. Killing incapacitated enemies violates those rules. The investigation expands. Investigators interview villagers about the intelligence that prompted the ambush. The courier who brought the warning about the planned massacre has vanished, possibly dead, possibly fictional. No one can corroborate his existence or his information. The German documents captured from the officer's body are examined by military intelligence. They reference security operations in the Vosges region, but contain no specific massacre plans. A troubling pattern emerges. Jean-Claude planned and executed an ambush killing 23 German soldiers based on intelligence that cannot be verified from a source that cannot be located to prevent a massacre that may never have been planned. In January 1945, the investigation produces an interim report. The conclusions are carefully worded but devastating. While the participants claim they acted to prevent imminent massacre of civilians, no documentary evidence supports the existence of such plans. While they claim all Germans killed were armed combatants, forensic evidence suggests at least 4 were killed after incapacitation, possibly after attempting to surrender or while wounded and disarmed. While participants characterize their actions as legitimate resistance, the operation lacks evidence of proper authorization from recognized command authority. The report stops short of recommending prosecution, but leaves that option explicitly open, pending further investigation.
Jean-Claude reads a copy obtained through the mayor. Every sentence is technically true and completely misses the reality. He made impossible decisions in impossible circumstances with imperfect information and limited time. The forensic analysis of blood pools and powder residue doesn't capture what it's like to stand in a forest clearing with 23 enemy soldiers, some dead, some dying, some still dangerous, knowing you have minutes before reinforcements arrive. His wife asks, "Will they charge you?" "I don't know." "You saved the village." "Maybe." The uncertainty is worse than guilt. If he'd saved 400 people, the 23 dead Germans would mean something. But if the intelligence was wrong, if no massacre was planned, then he killed 23 men for nothing. He won't know the truth. The courier is gone. The German files are ambiguous. History will never definitively answer whether March 12, 1944 was heroism or murder. February 1945, the investigation is suspended pending the war's end and establishment of permanent courts. Jean-Claude is not charged, not exonerated, just left in legal limbo. Free, but suspected. Hero and potential war criminal simultaneously. The village's attitude shifts definitively. People who thanked him in 1944 avoid him in 1945. Parents tell their children to stay away from Monsieur Moreau, who killed all those Germans. The ambiguity is toxic. If he saved them, they owe him everything. If he didn't, he's a murderer who endangered them with his violence. Unable to resolve this ambiguity, most villagers choose the easier path. Distance themselves from Jean-Claude entirely. Let history decide. Don't get involved. By March 1945, 1 year after the ambush, Jean-Claude is effectively isolated in his own village. The 11 men who fought beside him experience similar ostracism. They meet occasionally, drinking together in silence, bound by shared experience, but unable to discuss it. What is there to say? They killed 23 men and saved maybe 400 people, and destroyed their own lives in the process. The questions have no answers. The investigation has no conclusion. Jean-Claude is trapped in the 45 seconds he can never escape, endlessly wondering if he was a hero or a murderer, or both, or neither. The war in Europe ends in May 1945. For most of France, it's liberation, celebration, rebuilding. For Jean-Claude, it's just the beginning of a different war. One fought in courts and memories and a village that can't decide whether to thank him or condemn him. May 1946. Jean-Claude attempts to return to teaching. The Regional Education Authority has reopened schools across France, hiring back teachers who served in the resistance or endured occupation. Jean-Claude's pre-war record is excellent. 12 years of service, strong evaluations, no disciplinary issues. He should be a straightforward rehire. The school board meets to consider his application. 8 members, the mayor, 3 local parents, 2 clergy, and 2 teachers. The discussion, which Jean-Claude learns about later through sympathetic sources, lasts 3 hours. Arguments in favor. He saved the village. He's an experienced, qualified teacher. His students loved him before the war. He fought for France. Arguments against. He killed 23 men, some possibly while wounded. He's under investigation for war crimes. Parents are uncomfortable having a killer teach their children. What if he has violent episodes? What if children ask about the war and he describes what he did?
The vote is 5-3 to deny his application. The official explanation is bureaucratic, position filled by another qualified candidate. The unofficial explanation, which everyone knows, is that Jean-Claude Moreau makes people uncomfortable. He's a living reminder of violence the village wants to forget. Marie finds him at their kitchen table reading the rejection letter. He's not crying, not angry, just staring at paper with hollow eyes. "What will we do?" she asks. "I don't know." He finds work as a day laborer, construction, road repair, hauling supplies, manual labor that requires no qualifications and no background checks. He's 34 years old with a university education, working alongside teenagers for subsistence wages. Every shovel of dirt, every brick laid, reminds him of what he lost. The village divides into factions, those who believe Jean-Claude saved them versus those who believe he endangered them, those who see a hero versus those who see a killer. The division isn't clean. Many people hold both views simultaneously, unable to reconcile the cognitive dissonance. The Moreau family becomes a social experiment in moral ambiguity. Some neighbors still greet Marie warmly, bring her vegetables from gardens, include her in community activities. Others cross the street to avoid her. Children who played with the Moreau daughters before the war are suddenly forbidden from visiting. The division deepens when new information emerges. In 1947, a former German soldier publishes a memoir mentioning the March 12, 1944 ambush. He wasn't present, but heard about it from survivors. According to his account, the patrol was indeed a routine supply escort, lightly armed, not expecting combat. Several wounded Germans survived the initial ambush, but were finished off by partisans, according to testimony from a soldier who escaped by playing dead. This detail, finished off by partisans, ignites controversy. Jean-Claude's defenders point out that the German account cannot be trusted, that enemy propaganda often portrayed resistance as barbaric. His critics point out that the account matches the French forensic evidence, wounded Germans shot at close range. The moral question becomes irreconcilable. If Jean-Claude executed wounded Germans who might have surrendered, he committed war crimes. If he killed wounded Germans who were still armed and dangerous, he made legitimate combat decisions. The 45-second time frame meant these decisions happened faster than conscious thought. How do you judge split-second actions made under combat stress using peacetime legal standards? The village cannot answer this question, so it fragments. By 1948, there are households that won't speak to each other over their different views of Jean-Claude Moreau. Church services are awkward because pro-Moreau families and anti-Moreau families sit on opposite sides of the aisle. The village that survived occupation intact is torn apart by arguing about the man who might have saved it. Jean-Claude's marriage begins failing in 1948. Marie still loves him, or loves who he was, but can't reach the person he's become. He drinks most evenings now, not to intoxication, but to numbness. He sits silently for hours. When she tries to discuss their future, he stares through her. "I killed them," he says sometimes, not explaining, just stating fact. "You saved us," she responds. "Maybe." That maybe is poison. If he knew he'd saved the village, he could live with the 23 German dead. If he knew the intelligence was wrong and he'd killed for nothing, he could confront that horror directly. But the uncertainty, the eternal maybe, offers no resolution. He's trapped in moral limbo, unable to be either hero or criminal, just suspended in perpetual doubt. The nightmares that started in 1944 worsen progressively. He wakes screaming about crawling wounded men, about the smoker's cigarette tumbling through air, about the boy Mark shooting at point-blank range. Marie wakes with him, holds him while he shakes, but there's no comfort she can offer. The images are burned into his brain, permanent. In 1949, 3 of the other ambush participants leave the region entirely. Henri moves to Paris, where no one knows his history. Pierre emigrates to Algeria. The 17-year-old who shot the wounded German, now 22, commits suicide in his father's barn, leaving a note that says only, "I'm sorry." The suicide devastates Jean-Claude. The boy was following orders, Jean-Claude's orders: finish the wounded. That instruction, given in the stress of planning an impossible mission, resulted in a child becoming a killer and eventually taking his own life. Jean-Claude attends the funeral. Half the village is there. When the priest eulogizes the young man's struggles to reintegrate after wartime trauma, everyone knows what it means. The boy couldn't live with what he'd done. After the funeral, an elderly woman approaches Jean-Claude. She's the dead boy's grandmother. "You told him to do it," she says, not accusing, just stating fact. "Yes. He was 17. I know. He never recovered." Jean-Claude has no response. She's right. He recruited a child, trained him to kill, ordered him to execute wounded enemies, and the child spent 5 years trying to process that before deciding he couldn't.
"I'm sorry," Jean-Claude says. "Are you? The question isn't hostile, just curious. Or do you think it was necessary?" "Both," Jean-Claude answers honestly. "It was necessary, and I'm sorry, and I would do it again, and I wish I hadn't. All of those things simultaneously." The old woman nods, understanding the impossible contradiction, and walks away. By 1950, the division in the village has calcified into permanent positions. Roughly 40% consider Jean-Claude a hero, 40% consider him a controversial figure best forgotten, and 20% consider him a criminal who escaped justice. These percentages will never change. The ambiguity is too deep, the evidence too contradictory, the moral questions too complex. Jean-Claude stops trying to convince anyone, stops defending himself, stops explaining. He works his manual labor jobs, drinks his wine, tolerates his nightmares, and exists in the village that both owes him everything and wishes he'd never pulled that trigger. Marie asks one final time, was it worth it? He considers 23 dead Germans, 1 suicide, 1 destroyed marriage, 1 teaching career ended, 1 village permanently divided, 1 man who can't sleep without seeing corpses. Ask the 400 people who are still alive. She asks you. But Jean-Claude has no answer. He saved the village, maybe, and it destroyed him, definitely. Whether the mathematics balance, he'll never know. April 1952. Jean-Claude receives a summons to appear before a special military tribunal investigating wartime resistance actions. The French government, now 8 years post-liberation, has finally established formal procedures for examining questionable operations. The tribunal isn't a criminal court. It's an investigative body with power to recommend prosecution or exoneration. The hearing takes place in Lyon, 3 hours from Jean-Claude's village. He travels alone. Marie has asked for separation, not divorce, but distance. They still live in the same house, but sleep in different rooms, speak in practical necessities only. She can't watch him destroy himself anymore. The tribunal consists of 3 judges, a military officer, a civilian magistrate, and a resistance veteran. They've reviewed 8 years of accumulated evidence: forensic reports, witness statements, German documents, the dead soldier's memoir. The prosecutor, not formally prosecuting but presenting evidence for consideration, outlines the case methodically. March 12, 1944. 11 men ambushed 23 German soldiers. Initial attack killed approximately 15. 8 survived with wounds. Of those 8, at least 4 were killed at close range after being wounded. Evidence suggests some had crawled away from weapons. Testimony indicates at least 1 attempted to surrender.
The core legal question: were these killings legitimate combat or executions of wounded prisoners? Jean-Claude testifies for 6 hours. He describes the intelligence about the planned massacre, the decision to attack, the execution of the ambush. He's asked specifically about the wounded Germans. "Did you personally kill any wounded Germans?" "I shot at armed enemy soldiers. Some were wounded before I shot them. All were dangerous." "How do you define dangerous?" "A man crawling away from his weapon." "A German soldier who could still reach a weapon?" "Yes." "Even if he was attempting to surrender?" "No one attempted to surrender. They were shooting at us." Witness testimony suggests otherwise. One of your own men reported that a German raised his hands before being shot. Jean-Claude remembers vaguely the chaos, someone raising hands or maybe reaching for a weapon. Impossible to know in the moment. "I don't recall anyone surrendering." Convenient memory failure? No, honest memory of chaos. The prosecutor presents forensic evidence. Powder residue patterns indicating executions at 1 to 2 meters. Blood trail analysis suggesting wounded Germans moved away from threat before being killed. Shell casings found near bodies, 6:20 a.m., indicating shooters approached prone targets. Each piece of evidence is technically accurate and completely divorced from combat reality. Yes, Jean-Claude's men approached wounded Germans. Yes, they shot at close range. Because 45 seconds after initiating an ambush against 23 enemy soldiers, you don't have time for Geneva Convention protocols. You have time to ensure threats are neutralized before reinforcements arrive. The defense, Jean-Claude has a court-appointed lawyer, argues combat necessity, incomplete intelligence, reasonable belief in imminent massacre, split-second decisions under life-threatening stress. The prosecutor counters, ignorance of law is no excuse. Ends don't justify means. War crimes remain crimes, regardless of intentions. After 3 days, the tribunal adjourns to deliberate. They take 4 months to issue findings. The verdict, announced August 1952, is legally sophisticated and practically devastating. The tribunal finds that the March 12, 1944 operation was initiated based on unverified intelligence regarding alleged planned massacre. While participants acted in good faith belief that civilian lives were threatened, no documentary evidence substantiates the existence of German plans for mass reprisal. The tribunal further finds that while initial ambush was arguably legitimate resistance action, subsequent killing of wounded combatants violated established laws of war. However, considering the totality of circumstances, incomplete training in international law, extreme time pressure, reasonable belief in protecting civilians, the tribunal recommends against criminal prosecution while noting that the operation reflects troubling disregard for distinction between combatants and prisoners. Translation: Jean-Claude did something morally ambiguous that the court won't punish but won't condone. He's free but tainted, not guilty but not innocent. The finding satisfies no one. Jean-Claude's defenders are outraged. He saved 400 people and the government calls it troubling disregard? His critics are equally outraged. He executed wounded prisoners and faces no consequences? The ambiguity deliberately built into the verdict ensures the controversy never resolves. Jean-Claude becomes a permanent test case in the ethics of resistance warfare. Studied in military schools, debated in history classes, discussed in ethics seminars. The man exists in eternal limbo while his case achieves academic immortality. Practical consequences arrive immediately. Jean-Claude's application for teaching certification, submitted hopefully after the tribunal announced it wouldn't prosecute, is denied with reference to the tribunal findings: questionable wartime conduct. He's formally branded as morally compromised by the same government that didn't quite call him a criminal. He continues manual labor. ages into his 40s, then 50s. His body breaks down from decades of hard physical work it wasn't built for. His mind remains trapped in March 1944. By 1960, Jean-Claude is drinking heavily, not just evenings anymore, but mornings, afternoons, whenever he can afford it. He's functional enough to work, but deteriorating visibly. Former neighbors who once debated his heroism now cross the street to avoid the tragic drunk he's become. Marie leaves finally in 1963, after 25 years of marriage. She doesn't divorce him, Catholic conscience won't allow it, but she moves to live with her sister in another town. She's spent 19 years trying to save a man who died psychologically in a forest clearing. "I can't watch anymore," she tells him before leaving. I understand. He does understand. He's been watching his own disintegration for 2 decades. He doesn't blame her for leaving. The 1970s pass in alcoholic fog. Jean-Claude lives alone in the house where he once had a family, worked as a teacher, planned to grow old normally. His daughters visit occasionally, dutifully, but they barely know him. They were children when the war ended. They grew up with a father who was physically present, but psychologically destroyed. They have sympathy, but not connection. The village that once debated his heroism now mostly forgets him. New families move in who know nothing about the war. Young people grow up hearing vague stories about Monsieur Moreau who did something in the resistance, without details. The passionate arguments of the 1940s fade to historical footnote. But Jean-Claude never forgets, cannot forget. The images remain perfectly preserved. The smoker's cigarette, the officer's surprise, the blood on snow, the wounded man crawling. 40 years haven't diminished them. If anything, they've grown sharper with time, more detailed, more vivid. He sits in his kitchen most days, drinking cheap wine, staring at the wall where his teaching certificates once hung before he took them down in 1946. He calculates the same mathematics he's calculated for 40 decades. 23 Germans killed, 400 villagers saved maybe, 1 marriage destroyed, 1 career ended, 1 life consumed. Does the math balance? At what exchange rate does human life trade? If he definitely saved 400 people, then 23 enemy soldiers is cheap. If the intelligence was wrong and he killed 23 men for nothing, then it's mass murder. The uncertainty never resolves. In 1982, a French historian researching resistance activities interviews Jean-Claude for a book. The historian is young, academic, interested in moral complexity. He asks the questions everyone has asked for 40 years. Do you regret the ambush? I regret being forced to choose between killing 23 men or watching 400 people die. But do you regret the choice you made? I regret having to make it. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. The historian publishes his book in 1983. Jean-Claude's case takes up 1 chapter titled The Ambiguous Hero, Resistance Violence and Moral Responsibility. The chapter is fair, balanced, intellectually honest. It concludes that Jean-Claude Moreau represents the impossible moral terrain of occupation resistance, men forced into impossible choices with incomplete information and insufficient time, judged decades later by people who never faced such choices. Jean-Claude never reads it. By 1984, he's deteriorating rapidly, cirrhosis, malnutrition, decades of alcoholism destroying his liver and kidneys. He enters hospital in January 1984. His daughters visit. His estranged wife visits once. The village mayor visits, paying respects to a man who once mattered to local history. Jean-Claude is conscious but weak, knowing he's dying. A priest comes offering last rites. Jean-Claude accepts. He's not particularly religious, but sees no reason to refuse. "Do you have confessions?" the priest asks gently. "I killed 23 men in March 1944. "In war, defending your community?" "Maybe." "You saved your village?" "Maybe." The priest blesses him, uncertain whether Jean-Claude has confessed sins or stated facts. Perhaps both.
Jean-Claude Moreau dies March 12, 1984, exactly 40 years after the ambush. The symbolic timing is coincidental but fitting. He spent exactly as long dying from the ambush as the ambush took seconds to execute. 45 seconds of violence, 40 years of consequences, a lifetime exchanged for less than a minute. The funeral is modest. Perhaps 50 people attend, daughters, a few old resistance members, curious locals. The eulogy is careful, diplomatic. The priest mentions wartime service to France and personal sacrifices without specifics. No mention of 23 dead Germans or 400 saved villagers or 40 years of psychological destruction. The obituary in the regional newspaper is 3 paragraphs. It mentions he was a teacher before the war, participated in resistance activities, died at age 72. Nothing about the ambush, the tribunal, the lifetime of controversy. History, it seems, has already moved on. But in the village, in the families that survived because Jean-Claude killed, in the moral philosophy courses that study his case, in the military tribunals that cite his trial as precedent, in all these places the questions remain. Was Jean-Claude Moreau a hero who saved 400 people? A war criminal who executed wounded prisoners? A tragic figure destroyed by impossible circumstances? All of these? None. The mathematics never balanced. 23 lives taken, 400 lives saved maybe, 1 life consumed definitely. The equation has no solution. Jean-Claude spent 40 years trying to solve it and died without answers. Perhaps the most honest assessment comes from Henri, the man who fired the Sten gun, who survived into the 1990s and gave a final interview before his death. "We did what we thought was necessary. It destroyed us. Both things are true. Anyone who claims to understand wasn't there. Anyone who was there understands there's nothing to understand, just choices made in seconds that echo for lifetimes." Jean-Claude Moreau is buried in the village cemetery, 3 rows from where the 17-year-old is buried, the boy who shot the wounded German and couldn't live with it. The village that once debated whether Jean-Claude was a hero now mostly remembers that a schoolteacher named Moreau did something important in the war before drinking himself to death. The ambiguity, it seems, was the only thing that ever ended. History settled on forgetting rather than judging. Jean-Claude would have understood. After 40 years trapped in 45 seconds, erasure probably seemed like mercy. This story is a work of fiction, created to explore documented patterns of psychological and legal consequences faced by resistance fighters after World War II. Though Jean-Claude Moreau and the specific March 12, 1944 ambush are fictional, the narrative is grounded in multiple verified historical phenomena. Historical foundation. French resistance operations did include ambushes of German patrols, some of which involved controversial tactics regarding wounded combatants. Post-war France conducted extensive investigations called épuration, or purge, examining both collaboration and resistance actions. Approximately 300,000 cases were investigated, with some resistance members facing scrutiny for methods used during operations. The legal ambiguity regarding partisan warfare was genuine. The Hague Conventions, 1907, and Geneva Conventions, 1929, provided limited protection for irregular combatants.
Resistance fighters who didn't wear uniforms, didn't carry arms openly, and operated without formal military structure occupied legal gray areas. Some post-war tribunals did investigate resistance killings, particularly cases involving prisoners or wounded combatants. Psychological reality. The long-term PTSD described for Jean-Claude reflects documented patterns among resistance fighters and combat veterans. Studies conducted in the 1970s to 1990s on French resistance survivors found significant rates of post-traumatic stress, depression, alcoholism, and difficulty reintegrating into peacetime society. It wasn't widely recognized or treated during the 1940s to 1960s. The community division depicted mirrors documented social fractures in post-war French villages. Communities that experienced violence, whether from occupiers or resistance, often struggled with conflicting narratives about what occurred and whether it was justified. Some resistance members were initially celebrated, then ostracized as details emerged or as communities wanted to move past wartime divisions. Composite character. Jean-Claude represents composite experiences drawn from multiple sources. Resistance members investigated for questionable operations, combat veterans who developed severe PTSD, heroes whose recognition came with complications, individuals who made split-second decisions judged decades later under different standards. Technical accuracy. The ambush tactics, weapons capabilities, forensic analysis methods, and legal proceedings described reflect period-accurate practices. The tribunal structure and legal reasoning mirror actual post-war investigative bodies. Fictionalized elements. The specific ambush, village, individuals, and 40-year timeline are narrative constructions. The precise forensic details, tribunal verdict language, and individual psychological trajectory are dramatized for storytelling while remaining true to documented patterns. Purpose. This narrative explores the moral complexity of resistance warfare, the psychological cost of violence even when potentially justified, and the impossibility of judging wartime decisions from peacetime perspectives. It honors resistance fighters not as sanitizing their experiences, but by acknowledging the genuine moral and psychological burdens they carried. The ambiguity is intentional, reflecting the genuine moral uncertainty many resistance participants experienced. Historical context sources. French resistance operations and aftermath are documented in extensive historical literature, including tribunal records, psychological studies of veterans, community histories, and resistance member memoirs. The legal and psychological patterns depicted reflect findings from multiple scholarly works on post-war France and combat trauma. This story stands as exploration of moral injury, the cost of violence even in just causes, and the burden carried by those who make impossible choices in impossible circumstances. Jean-Claude's story reveals what history often hides, that heroism has costs we rarely discuss. If this deeper exploration of resistance warfare resonated with you, please like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts on the moral complexity we explored, and subscribe for more stories that go beyond simple hero narratives.